Hey, Sonograver here. Welcome back to my channel. Let's talk about the awful decision to include an 80s song for this teaser trailer of this upcoming He-Man animated series. Now, before we get started, I just want to say that I have no problem with this song by Bonnie Tyler. Now, I think this song, I Need a Hero, was released in 1984, which is the same time Filmation's He-Man was airing. But that's not a good reason for putting this song in this trailer. In fact, I think it's a bad reason. This is strictly to bait people with some nostalgia, people who had been kids in the 80s growing up with these Saturday morning cartoons. I can give you two reasons why this is a short-sighted decision. The first reason is pretty obvious. You don't include 80s music for something simply because it was produced in the 80s. He-Man is set in Eternia, in a world and universe of magic and pseudoscience. In this world, we are far removed from any fictitious representation of Earth. Now, Earth is established in this universe. We do have a callback to Earth with the character Queen Marlena, but we never see Earth, at least not in the physical, material, cultural sense, and we don't see what Earth even looks like in the 80s. So the idea of the 80s, of that decade, any images, any ideas of the 80s, that's not even relative to this world. So it doesn't even make sense that you would have something 80s related or 80s specific. Now, can you work with music that is time specific to the setting? Oh yeah. I think the perfect example is Disney's animated show Gargoyles, and I think that was produced back in the 90s, and it's been years since I've seen the cartoon. This would have been a great opportunity to use songs of the 90s or work with 90s specific instrumentation, because these characters were brought out of their own time, their own original time, to, I believe, the 1990s, to specifically Brooklyn, New York. So you've got this setting that is very familiar to what we would have experienced in Brooklyn, New York in the 1990s. I mean, I'm expecting different accents, regional accents of the United States. And I would expect some cultural cues. In fact, if I remember some of the humor between the three gargoyles, Broadway, Brooklyn, and Lexington, to absorb their environment, they went to the theater. They saw movies. So they would reference Bambi or Star Wars, and that humor is great because it's all about that very specific setting in that area of the United States in that decade. Now, I don't remember time-specific music for that show. I think the composer went ahead and did some orchestral cinematic music, and that's fine. That was totally fine to do so. But that would have been a great show to experiment that musical idea with. So Eternia, the world of He-Man, looks nothing like the 80s. It was made in the 80s, but in terms of setting and story, it's not of the 80s, so don't include 80s music just because it was produced in the 80s. And on 80s music, we also have to remember that the composer of He-Man, Filmation's He-Man, Shuki Levy, did not include 80s songs in his own soundtrack. He used synthesizers and sonic nuances and maybe a little bit of strings and brass, whether those were actual samples of a recorded orchestra, or maybe they were part of a synthesizer library of that time. But the point is, he had his own score, and it's a beautiful score. It's really a very compelling score for a kid's cartoon. It's got an element of the Forbidden Planet, where it's just that old science fiction feel. You've got the sine tones, you've got the sonic nuances, you've got that mystery, and it really is akin to that specific world. It's wonderful. It really pulls you into that mysterious land and world of Eternia. Now I know I'm critiquing a piece of music, a song that is for a teaser trailer. But if they wanted to hearken us back to Eternia, back to Filmation's He-Man, they really should have worked with Levy's score or around it. Even if they don't have rights to that specific music, find a composer who has those musical sensibilities. You know, someone who is professional, someone who can quickly produce 90 seconds of music that takes us back to that original cartoon. So we've been talking about the 80s, and this gets into my second reason why including this 80s song is a musical misstep. Take a look at this animation. Is this animation of the 80s? Why am I hearing 80s music set to animation that was produced 1 or 2 years ago? They're not even being clever about their nostalgia baiting. It's a kind of cognitive dissonance where the juxtaposition of these two things doesn't feel right. And speaking of new animation, look at this new design of Trapjaw. That is not Trapjaw. He doesn't have a mouth sitting behind his helmet. His helmet is his mouth. That's the whole point of his character. So that is not Trapjaw. This is Trapjaw. So overall, I don't think the song itself is bad. It's just ham-fisted in this trailer. It's an 80s song for an 80s show that was not about the 80s, set to animation that's not from the 80s. Now, what would I do if I were given the task to compose the music for the trailer? What would I do? I'm glad you asked. The first thing is I would go back to the iconic theme, that iconic He-Man theme. He-Man! I mean, come on, that's like I don't think I even did that right, but the point is, you gotta go back to the He-Man theme. Now, I did a whole analysis on this iconic theme, so go check it out. It's great. I just love this theme. And I think the composer Shuki Levy really worked with this theme, this song. It's got the world behind this song. It's got the culture behind this song. Yes, He-Man has some Celtic, Scandinavian culture behind that image, behind that filmation look. That theme song really does musically depict that kind of culture, so I would start there. I would also use a hybrid of electronic instruments and the orchestra, that electroacoustic tapestry. That's really important for a setting that includes magic and science fiction. Now, people might say, well, this is just trailer music. That sounds awfully expensive to hire a composer working with these different things. First of all, a composer can have a library of orchestra and electronic instruments. That's one thing. And second of all, we need better trailer music. This is going to be another video for another time, but I actually am not too keen on including songs and older music anyway in trailer music. I think trailer music should be original compositions, and I think people should hire composers to do the job. Because trailer music today sounds generic and dumb. But this is another video for another time. But in any case, I hope you liked that. Please check out my analysis on the iconic He-Man theme. And until I see you next, keep producing and preserving the art you love, and I will catch you later. Thanks again.